While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Franke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Perhaps you're familiar with the phrase, ignorance is bliss. It was first written by English poet Thomas Gray in 1742. The poet was reflecting on the carefree aspect of childhood and how, in knowing nothing, life is most delightful. Well, have to admit, he does have a point. Not recognizing or dealing with problems does eliminate them from your day-to-day. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean they fail to exist. The reality is that choosing to remain ignorant about ongoing problems is far from delightful, especially for all of those who have to continue to operate with their heads above sand level and beneath the clouds. Our guest for today's episode, Cyberproof's Nick Lantu, illustrates this pretty plainly when discussing two of industrial cybersecurity's biggest pain points, supply chain security and the surge in ransomware attacks. Both seem to share the same underlying causality. Industrial organizations simply think they're too small or too unimportant to be attacked, something that is repeatedly and painfully being realized as ignorant and far from blissful. Nick, thanks for taking the time to join us today, and welcome to Security Breach. Jumping right into it in here, we had a really interesting conversation out at RSA. One of the things that you kind of talked a lot about, you made some interesting comments about some of the threats from China. I think you even made a comment about Russia along the lines of if the Russians want in, they're going to get in. And it just kind of gets me thinking about the threat landscape in total right now. There's a lot of different variables, a lot of different things going on. But when we look at trying to prioritize things, do you put some of these foreign actors or some of these state-sponsored actors at the top of the threat list right now, or what do you see there going on?
Well, I think you always have to be cognizant of the nation states. Obviously, there's reasons for them to be looking at our manufacturing capabilities, but then there's also just criminal activities that are happening, right? From obviously a ransomware standpoint that are just as important. I would say that organizations need to protect themselves against.
Absolutely. I think one of the areas right now with manufacturing that's getting much more priority in terms of things that we're trying to defend against are the supply chains in particular. We see stuff going on, and obviously before it was Ukraine, now it's Iran. It's always been issues with North Korea and China. Are supply chains a bigger priority right now, or what are some of the bigger threats that you're seeing specific to that particular area?
From a supply chain standpoint, obviously for us, defending manufacturing organizations is, the attackers are really going after now the smaller, less secure suppliers in those chains. And so I think that that's one of the things that, needs to be recognized. There was a huge increase in 2025 of, attacks going after smaller, less secure supply chains. In addition to that, obviously there's the issue of the software supply chain. In the manufacturing environment, a lot of code is open source. So some of that source code is very fraught with vulnerabilities. And so there's a lot of issues around that need to obviously be addressed and thought through when you're implementing it.
Absolutely. So what's the typical dynamic there? What are you seeing? Is it more of the larger manufacturers trying to reach out and educate some of their smaller suppliers? Do the suppliers need to take more of that responsibility on themselves? Or what have you seen in terms of that dynamic, in terms of everybody trying to work together, because it is so interrelated right now?
Yeah, it's actually both. I think, there's certainly, some of the larger suppliers are reaching down into their supply chain and conducting audits, from a defensive readiness standpoint. But also these smaller players, these smaller manufacturers, obviously don't have the budgets, to go and do this properly. But I think there is definitely a movement towards the smaller players adopting, MDR service and MSSP-like services, to bring them in to be able to provide the talent and the know-how of how to protect them a little bit better than what they currently are.
Yeah. We know that both there's issues in terms of investment levels and the different tools. There's also issues in terms of manpower and expertise. If you had to categorize them, what do you think is the bigger issue right now, or what should maybe take priorities for some of these small to medium-sized manufacturers? Is it getting the tools? Is it getting the folks that understand it better? Where should they maybe put things first?
Yeah, from the smaller side, I mean, it's hard for them to procure, a full stack of tools, right? That's
Yeah.
a very expensive, undertaking, and it's hard to attract the type of talent that is needed. So what we're seeing is that there's certainly a movement towards, you know, acquiring managed services and managed detection and response and XDR services from the outside, from organizations that have the capability to to lend both the people, the technology, the procedures, the processes, on how to protect those environments. And they're complex environments, right? They're not, they're certainly not easy environments to protect.
Well, and is this a place where AI comes in? I mean, we talk about artificial intelligence and cybersecurity all the time, but is this a place where maybe we see the adoption levels pick up or the pace of adoption pick up a little bit, that it could be a solution for some of these folks who are struggling in terms of investment, manpower, expertise?
Yeah, look, I think that the AI adoption is certainly coming. All right, it's being used, by the adversaries, and to counterbalance that, to be able to respond at machine speeds, then there's certainly a need for, AI-driven defenses, and that part of the market is maturing rapidly right now. And there's a lot of great, players out there that are augmenting their existing solutions with AI-based capabilities. But yeah, I do believe that there's a place for, AI defenses. It's rapidly evolving here as we
Yeah.
speak.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, it seems like the struggle in manufacturing is always, where do we start? Where's that jumping off point? From your perspective, what is the best place AI can maybe jump in there? Is it helping with some of these shrinking response times? Is it an asset inventory? Is it just becoming more aware of all your endpoints? If they were going to implement it to get started, where do you think is a good place to go?
Yeah, I think part of it is, kind of deploying into that, AI-driven detection tool sets, right? And
Yeah.
identifying anomalies and doing it, in machine behaviors, right? At machine speeds. I think that's really important. And I think that combining that with more of a threat intelligence led defensive posture, right, where it's more proactive, where you're doing things more in a proactive nature to say, okay, who are the threats that are targeting us, and what are the tactics, techniques, and procedures that they're using, and what vulnerabilities do we have in our environment and our asset base that we need to protect. So, I think that AI being used in that more machine speed type of environment, and marrying that together with a defense, threat defense led kind of posture is where the industry needs to go. But there's also a lot of issues, from a governance standpoint and from a usage policy standpoint, when you start deploying AI within your environment, that organizations need to be cognizant of. And so I think that there's a needs to be an eyeball on that. But also I think you combine that AI driven tool set from a detection standpoint and anomaly identification standpoint, with data loss prevention tools and others, then I think that you start to have a good foundational base of how to protect those environments a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those pitfalls a little bit. You've worked with a number of manufacturers and just companies overall who I'm sure are trying to get on board with AI, and maybe go too fast. Maybe they're not going too slow, but there's definitely areas where that pace can be an issue. The way that it's implemented, the way it's introduced to employees can be a problematic. What have you seen as maybe some of the biggest issues when it comes to implementing AI where folks have fallen down a little bit or we can learn from it?
Well, I think we're in the beginning stages of those implementations, right? And so, right now there's a lot of the big players in the space, the platform players, the tool set providers, are coming out with really solid, AI strategies and how to blend that together with their existing stack of solutions. And I think that right now it's relying on those large players, and the tool providers, for that AI enablement. So I think that there's a lot of great solutions that are out there, and it's coming at it from a lot of different angles. It's coming at it from the detection and response side. It's coming at it from the threat hunt side. It's coming at it from numerous angles, the vulnerability side. So it's being adopted and used by these by the vendors that are being deployed in these environments as we speak. So it's not so much that the manufacturing base is going to have to stand up and say, hey, what specific AI tools am I going to have? It's being incorporated into the way defenders are, and vendors and product providers are doing it today.
No, it makes sense. And I mean, every environment's a little bit different. Every enterprise is a little bit unique. So there's really trying to figure out that sort of that magic formula that works for everyone involved.
Right.
And a lot of that, as you've alluded to a couple times, it comes back to what you're trying to defend and who you're defending against. When you look at those two dynamics here, what have you seen as some of the biggest evolutions over time in terms of the threat landscape? Has it just been the speed? Have you seen changes in tactics or attackers, or what have been some of the biggest things that folks have had to adjust to?
Yeah, I mean it's quite a bit, right? I mean, I think that
Yeah,
as right, manufacturing is the most targeted industry,
yeah,
right? For I think 3 or 4 years running right now, and it's really focusing in on the fact that that environment is really dealing with an IT and an OT environment, and they're blended together now. And so, the whole idea of the risks that manufacturers are now facing, it's I would say probably ransomware and operational disruption are probably top of mind on everyone's thoughts. And obviously the adversaries are targeting downtime, especially large environments where you know every hour is millions of dollars of lost productivity. But they're also advancing how they're doing this, right? It's not a simple encrypt environment anymore. Now they're encrypting, they're stealing the data, they're launching DDoS attacks all simultaneously, right? The nation states that we talked about earlier are obviously looking for IP related proprietary information, processes, blueprints. Certain industries like aerospace and semiconductor are especially under duress right now. And I think that this whole convergence of the IT and OT environment, where you've got legacy systems and legacy PLCs that are lacking encryption and security, and MFA, it's just difficult to patch in those environments. And so there's these there's a constant overhang of how do we secure both of those types of environments. And now that we've opened up the OT side to the internet, it becomes really difficult to go ahead and protect those environments. And you blend that together with a lot of the AI-driven phishing and social engineering attacks that are coming at these organizations. It's very difficult. It's a difficult environment.
no, absolutely. I mean, you laid out all the challenges there pretty clearly, and I think some of the bigger ones, especially the patching, finding time to figure out when to
Yep.
do that with all the older technology that's in place, and that kind of leads to you also mentioned ransomware. It's manufacturing is just a prime target, and it continues to escalate in terms of how much that's being paid out. So let me throw and there's no right answer to this. I understand it depends on a lot of variables, but just generally speaking, when a manufacturer is facing a ransomware attack and they're giving that demand, what's your initial gut feeling or advice? Do you pay that ransom? Do you hold off on it? What has been your experience in trying to advise people in those types of situations?
It's difficult, right? I mean,
Yeah.
as much as everybody says, hey, don't pay it, right? Sometimes you have to. And
Yeah.
there's countless cases of that happening. Obviously, if you have great backups, if you've got failover systems, that's fantastic if you're prepared
Yeah.
that way. And if you're not, then you're at the mercy of the adversary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It feels like some of the best responses to these, whether you're paying or not paying, is going to depend on the response plans. And I think that's where manufacturers are still lagging. They've gotten so much better, really, since Colonial Pipeline in terms of detection and
hmm
inventory and all of that, but the response is still in a tough spot. Talking to this group right now, if they're taking those initial steps in putting together those response plans, what advice might you offer there?
Well, I mean, I think, as you said, right, that, you got to have great backups. You've got to have a really fleshed out incident response plan, right, to
Yeah.
jump into action as soon as something happens. And it's really about speed. It's speed and comprehensiveness of what you've backed up and what you have as failovers in terms of systems to keep those lines running. Because it's again, there's a lot of legacy systems out there. There's a ton of vulnerabilities. There's a lack of visibility in those environments typically. And you know, what you really need to do from a mitigation standpoint, is to have a continuous monitoring environment up, right, to detect anomalies on that plant floor, to be able to see what's going on. You got to have network segregation, right, to separate out those OT and IT systems, right, to prevent lateral movements. You have to have the backups that are, on a regularly, scheduled timeline being backed up and offline, and so that you can recover properly without having to go pay. And in many cases, it comes down to, lack of employee training. So, I think that there needs to be, a steady drumbeat of training, right, against, phishing attacks and against, being able to mitigate, these types of avenues into the organization.
Yeah. It's interesting. The more we talk about some of these super complex problems and challenges out there, the solutions can be very basic at times. A lot of blocking and tackling, as I like to say. So it's interesting to hear that repeatedly talking about backups and training people and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So Nick, maybe you can talk to us too a little bit about Cyberproof, your company that you work with there. What are they about? What are some of the things that they offer the industrial sector?
Yeah, so we offer a full host of managed services in the environment. So everything from managed detection and response to managed XDR, to threat hunting and detection engineering, and just a full host of threat intelligence services, et cetera. And we do it all with a threat-led environment. So we start with the threat, and we look at the threats that are most impactful to an organization, and then we back into what needs to be done from a defensive standpoint. So, we do a really good job of correlating together, the attackers, the active campaigns that are running against organizations that look and smell and feel like you do. And then we tie that together with all of the malware being used, the CVEs associated with it, the exposed assets, the identities in your environment attached to those assets, and then we tie that back to the TTPs. We marry that up to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and we're able to show what needs to be done from a prioritization standpoint in terms of visibility, in terms of detection logic, in terms of compensating controls and configurations, in order to best defend your organization against the threats that are most likely targeting you and most likely to impact the business. So that's how we look at the whole business, and all of our services that wrap around that, everything from pen testing and threat intelligence services and detection engineering services and purple teaming and red teaming and blue teaming, is all concentrated around that thought of, okay, let's start with the most likely threats that these organizations are facing today and make sure that we protect the known knowns as best as we can. So that's how we look at the world from cyberproof as a whole.
Absolutely. So, manufacturers, more of them are working with MSPs or looking to work with managed service providers. That first step is sometimes the toughest, the longest, the most difficult to get going.
Mhm.
What advice would you offer in terms of, number one, getting that conversation started, maybe selecting the right MSP for you? And then what are some things that folks can do along the course of that journey to get the most out of it, as opposed to just sort of, it's over here, it's out of sight, out of mind. We need to continue to be engaged.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of great providers out there, right, with a lot of great skill sets and capabilities. And I think it's great to run, a comprehensive, RFP, RFI process, in order to determine, who's the best fit for you. Some organizations are better with large enterprises, others are better in the SMB world. Some come packaged with their own black box and, capabilities. Others just use the tooling that you already have. So, it's just an understanding of, who the better fit is, who the best fit is for your organization. But then, being able to somehow, understand what they're doing, right? Because, we also don't believe that it's smart to just, trust implicitly, right? It's great to be able to verify it in some way as well. So, there's some tooling out there, and we provide some of this tooling to our customers where you can verify that, that your vendor is doing what's best for you. So, it's sometimes you get caught in this thought process of, geez, are they just doing what's best for their, balance sheet, or are they doing what's best for us to protect us the right way? And so we've got some audit kind of capabilities where if you've got an MSSP or an MDR provider that's doing the defense for you, we can actually put up a dashboard and show you, hey, here's what they're doing. This is your security, this is your actual security posture. Here's what needs to be done, and this is what's being done. So we could show a gap analysis. But it's nice to have some way to verify that they're actually doing what's best for you, because you know it's not great to just say, okay, we trust you implicitly, and not have a way to to verify it.
Absolutely. I want to circle back a little bit on the conversation about artificial intelligence, whether it was RSA the last couple of years or just the general dynamic or just a general dialogue right now in cybersecurity. It's AI, and then, of course, it's agentic AI, and what all these different agents can do and the best way to employ them. Again, we're dipping our toe in the water a little bit when it comes to some of these things. When you look at agentic AI specifically, are you seeing specific applications or certain areas of cybersecurity where they work the best? I mean, we've talked a lot about threat detection. We've talked a lot about understanding the threat landscape. Is that an area for them, or are you seeing better places that they can be employed?
We're seeing it being employed all across the board, right? So, across the stack, we're seeing AI being used, and just so long as the data set that it's working off of is definitive, um,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fine, right? What you don't want to do is put it in a place where it's guessing. And so, we've spent, a lot of time making sure that, the foundational data is the exact data set that, you want to, dig through. And in those cases, if the data is sound, right, the solution, what AI is going to kick out to you is going to be sound. But we see it across the board. We see it being used in every aspect. We're doing the same thing within our environment. We're using it across almost all aspects of our business. You just have to. And the attacks are coming at you now at machine speeds. Whereas before, we first started seeing that kind of movement, back 10-ish years ago. And now that from an attacker standpoint has kind of been democratized. So now it's not just the realm of nation states that can do that type of, those types of attacks and be able to pivot, at machine speeds. You got to be able to respond in order to counterbalance that properly. And you got to have, layered, defense in depth, so that, look, if something does happen, right, there's additional mitigating capabilities in your environment that are going to stop it from, ultimately a data exfiltration, or a ransomware lockdown, or whatever the end goal might be. But yeah, we're seeing it really, Jeff, everywhere, being used and being used effectively.
Yeah. Well, it's
But
interesting.
again, we're at the early stages of this, right? And it's a
Yeah.
it's a it's a real acceleration, but we're still at the early stages.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It still goes back to one of those basic core elements of clean data and understanding your data in order to implement these additional technologies, which I just hope more people are paying attention to, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of backtracking and a lot of lost investment, just because you weren't set up right to begin with. So I think
Mhm.
that's an important part of the whole conversation as well that maybe we don't always spend enough time on. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and to that point, right, especially in the manufacturing world where you've got, you know, I don't even know what the exact number is, but what I've heard is that, there's maybe 10% of the OT networks are being continuously monitored, right? And there's a bunch of critical gaps that are out there We talked about the, IT OT convergence. There's certainly an invisible kind of OT shop floor, right? Where there's a bunch of assets out there that really aren't being monitored properly, right? And there's a lack of monitoring capabilities. There's a ton of unpatched assets out there. There's an incomplete kind of asset inventory problem that's out there in the manufacturing space that really does need to be addressed. But it's hard. And you combine that then with the whole idea of the cloud and you know everything that brings from the cloud to the data center to the edge devices that are a lot of unmonitored devices, but there's also a lot of devices in the environment that are being third party monitored right now, right? So a lot of vendors out there that are trying to put persistent access into that production environment, and that's another avenue in for the adversary. So it's a very complicated environment, and it's very complicated to put a proper detection and security solution in place for that type of complexity.
No, couldn't agree more. I mean, there's a lot of challenges out there. And I think what we're learning in the industrial side is, yeah, we do have all this, but number one, we got to do something. And if we can just continue to raise the bar incrementally, it doesn't have to happen all at once to try to, drink the ocean, eat the elephant, whatever you want to say. That's not going to be a good strategy because folks are going to get frustrated and whatever. But to do it incrementally, to take those steps, to use all the different tools and technology that's now out there, which there's never been such an array of different options in terms of try what you can implement too. So it's understanding the situation as we've been talking about here, the basics of it, and then making good decisions to incrementally get better and hopefully just make the bad guys go someplace else.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to make it painful enough where they pack up and go, this isn't worth it. Right.
Exactly.
There's softer targets out there. There's softer underbellies that we're going to go after.
Yeah. So Nick, this has been awesome. Really appreciate the time here. As we kind of wrap things up, any big trends you're seeing, things that are keeping you up at night, different stuff that you think we should be aware of going forward here?
Yeah, look, I think that from a manufacturer standpoint, right, this whole AI driven, cyber attack, at scale problem is absolutely targeting this environment, right, and this market segment. So, I think that's a huge issue that needs to be addressed. Again, this is that responding at machine speeds kind of capability. But then there's also the third parties, right, that have access to your environments, right? And, you know, whether that be, supply chain, as a vendor that's providing a solution, or whether that's a maintenance vendor, right, that's out there that has remote access and VPN capability right into your shop floor. So I think that's a huge issue. And then, because of all these, and we talked about this, the adoption of these generative AI tools, you've got employees out there that may be putting IP or proprietary, production data or designs out into public AI tools, right? So, this whole idea now that we need to start thinking about of, AI tool usage data leakage is a real problem. So, I think that, but I also think that, we talked about this too, is, there is a massive targeting of the small and mid-sized manufacturing segment out there that just doesn't have the proper, security posture, to be able to protect themselves properly. And that affects the entire supply chain. So I'd say that those are probably the biggest issues, that are out there, uh, um, that I see. And I also think that, organizations need to put in and establish some form of continuous monitoring of those OT systems, right, to sort of mitigate this. I think that there needs to be a zero trust kind of network access mentality put in place, where you can't have you know you can't have permanent established connections on all the time, right? Um, and so, I think that we talked a little bit about segmenting out the networks. I think that's great, a great idea to do that and kind of break that connection between, the office IT network and the production floor. And I think that, that ability to, put in some type of, DLP solution in and around your AI usage is super important.
Thanks, Nick. And to learn more about the work he and his colleagues are up to, you can check them out at cyberproof.com. I'd also like to thank you for joining us today, and to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, in.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check out Security Breach wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@in.com. For Nick Lantu, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.